This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We're in the state capitol today in Sacramento, and we are joined by the Republican leader of the California State Senate. Her name is Jean Fuller. Madam Leader, it's so good to speak with you. You've been on the job 6 months or so.
Yes.
How is it to be the leader of the California State Senate Republican caucus?
Very busy.
I can only imagine. But even so, tell me more about kind of the ins and outs, the daily life of a leader. What is it like for you?
Well, the daily life is to make sure that the Senate Republican caucus, first of all, and all of its members are well informed on all the issues, that they have all the tools they need to get their press out, and to make sure that they understand the rules of the floor and the rules of the House.
Now, let me ask you, how is it to be the leader of the party that is in the minority? You know, it does seem as if, and maybe I'm Pollyanna, that the Democrats and Republicans actually get along fairly well in Sacramento.
Yes.
Maybe I'm Pollyanna, I don't know. But am I saying it correctly that you do seem to try to work together?
Well, most people don't get elected unless they're charming.
Well stated, well stated, and
So
you are very charming.
So the very first day, we all meet each other, and we think, oh, how exciting and how charming all these wonderful people are. We're going to have a great time.
Right.
And then as we begin to get into the issues, we begin to find the divides. And then as we get a little further along, we start, well, you know how some families, even best families, fight over money a little bit. Well, we start doing that.
But the question is the divide over issues, or does it start to get personal? Because our friends in Washington, D.C., it seems as if those divides have become personal, whereas from where I sit, it seems as if in Sacramento, look, it's still politics, but look, I see, walk around town, you're at restaurants with each other. Is that a facade, or are you trying to work together?
Well, in the Senate, because most of us have worked with each other in the Assembly, it's a different group. We're much more collegial.
That's nice.
We have longer terms, and we've spent more time with each other. So most of us have learned how to take what we like and to roll with what we don't like. But still, there are times when it gets very heated for some of us.
Let's talk about what's on your mind right now, Shirley, and that's the state budget.
Yes.
Governor Brown has issued a proposed budget, his January budget, and I received press releases from the Republican caucus. I received press releases from the Democratic caucus. The Republican caucus's press release seemed a little more rosy than the Democrats. I mean, some have called Jerry Brown the best Republican governor we've had in decades. You know, what is it about this governor that, at least on budgetary matters, the Republicans seem to appreciate his approach, at least on some issues?
Well, we worked very hard together for the Rainy Day Fund, and we're very happy that he actually filled the Rainy Day Fund, that we're moving forward, trying to protect our state against disasters, natural disasters, and other kinds of things. So I think that's the starting point. The other thing is that there is a lot more money this year. Again, you know, last year was $10 billion unanticipated revenue. This year there's like over 3, maybe 5. And we haven't even counted it all yet when it comes in from taxes.
Of course.
So we are very excited that he is saying no new programs, backfill when we had to make those cuts, and not raise taxes.
So in your mind, when we do have this additional revenue, on what should it be spent? Should it be spent on paying down debt? Should it be spent on one-time programs, maybe a construction project for a group of schools in Kern County, let's say, or something like that? Where should the money go?
Well, you're a mind reader.
I am a mind reader, of course.
We believe that if we would pay down the interest, even more than the governor has done, he is paying the minimum amount. It's like paying the $15 on your credit card rather than paying off the lump sum. He could pay off more with some of the money, but we are excited that he is paying down debt. That's the number one. It saves the interest, and it improves our credit rating. And
clearly,
if we have a better credit rating, then we can actually build more infrastructure and some of the things that we need. Our highways are crumbling, and we have water needs, and we want those one-time expenditures to be used now while there's one-time money.
So let's talk about our roads, the drought, although are we in a drought anymore? It's hard to know. But there is consensus on a need to improve our roads, to build some form of dam somewhere. Yes. When is that going to happen?
Well, we've actually put money aside from the last water bond to build that, and we're working on that, but every day there are efforts to chip away at that effort, so we need to continue to work to that end. And no, we're not out of the drought. We are in an El Nino, which we need to capture every drop. We don't want it just running out to the sea. We need to relieve the suffering.
But you know better than I. We are in an El Nino. The time is now to capture the water.
Absolutely.
And so how can we capture the water if we're not, raising Lake Shasta's height or
I totally agree. And that's one of the things we're working very hard on. And I went to the U.S. Department of Interior a month ago and talked to them, sent a letter to the governor and the president basically saying that we need to capture all of this water, we need to store it, and we need to continue to find flexible ways to move it.
Are your friends on the Democratic side on board with these matters?
Some. Actually, there's a moderate group of Democrats, mostly from the Valley area, that also support those issues. But as a whole, areas that have their own dams, such as Hetch Hetchy in San Francisco, they really don't feel the need the way we do.
The water wars continue.
Yes, the water wars continue.
Let's talk about taxes. The governor appears to be firm that he does not want to see an extension of Proposition 30 in any form. That being said, there is one issue as it relates to taxes that it appears needs to be fixed, and that deals with taxes on health plans, the MCO tax. As we speak today, what the law says in California is that those that provide Medicaid, Medi-Cal, they will be taxed. Those that don't will not. The federal government has said you need to tax all, you can't pick and choose. And so the governor is looking to create a scenario where that's leveled out, where everyone is taxed to avoid the loss of federal funds. I know some in the Republican caucus are a little queasy about that. Have you coalesced on an issue?
Well, actually,
like this?
we have been looking at that very closely. There is a new deal that the governor has proposed recently. All the details aren't out. We'll probably get them Wednesday or Thursday. We'll be looking at them. I think, but the biggest problem for us is why would we want more taxes when we already had $10 billion extra money last year? We have $3 billion or more this year, and it's not written into the budget. We have a balanced budget without that money.
So what do we do then when we have the federal government saying, if you don't make this tax apply to all health plans, we will take away $1.23 billion.
As long as California can afford it, which we can currently afford it, I think that we actually were in a good place because that funding only lasts for a couple of years and then it's up to us to do all.
Should we remove the tax even on the entities that provide Medicaid?
I think that we're basically thinking that if they provide a service and there's a nexus, even though we Republicans don't like taxes, then that's okay to leave it. But I don't think that stretching this to a whole new level where the workers basically are going to end up having to pay for that.
What about
those who work in companies who would then have to pass it along?
What about the gas tax? Again, you can point to lots of different statistics and studies, and some say the gas tax has an increase since 1992. I think that's true, and when you consider inflation, it's lower than what it was in 1992. But then you can look at it differently and say, no, we have seen some increased revenue.
Well, yeah, actually, we have enough money to fund all those. It's a matter of priorities. And of course, the Republican priorities are debt first, infrastructure second, and education third, being backfilled, which they did, and individuals with developmental disabilities. Also, we think that money needs to be put back. And those are our priorities, and there was plenty of money to do that. But when we move back to saying, so what should we do about some of those areas? Well, our problem with Republicans is that it takes one of us to actually pass a new tax or fee.
Because of the 2/3
Yes,
majority,
and once we do that, then they only takes a majority vote to reroute the money to other causes. And that's what happened to the transportation money in the first place, is that those weight fees and those gas tax was rerouted to other causes in the general fund. And so our stance is we want that money put back first, and we want guarantees that it stays there, and we want Caltrans to become more efficient.
Can you get guarantees?
We haven't gotten them yet, but there certainly are.
But it's possible to get them.
Constitutional amendments and those kinds of things.
Her name is Jean Fuller. She is the Republican leader in the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance in Sacramento. This is Local Edition. Welcome. This is Local Edition. We're in Sacramento today, the state's capital, and we are joined by Chad Mayes. He is the new Republican leader of the California State Assembly. Wow. You joined the Assembly last year, and you're the new leader.
Isn't that
Congratulations.
crazy? Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Talk to us about how you're feeling. How did this happen? What does this mean?
How did it happen? I don't know how
Right.
it happened. It just happened.
Right.
I've been here. I got elected last November of 2014.
Right.
So I've literally been around for 13, 14 months. And at the end of this last session, the current leader, Kristen Olson, had decided that she was looking at her future,
Right.
and that there was going to be a vote, and very quickly it happened. My colleagues, by unanimous support, had said, "Chad, we want you to be the next leader." So it was quite an honor.
The good news about your leadership is that, arguably, as a result of a reform in term limits, you will not be leaving in 5 years, presumably.
Presumably, yeah.
You will be able to stay in the chamber for 12 years total.
Yeah.
How do you think that change in the formula played into your ascension?
Well, in a number of different ways. One, if you look at those, if you're going to pick a new leader, then you're going to look at those who are freshmen or sophomores. Those
Right.
have been here for two terms, because the current seniors are going to be termed out next year, and so there isn't a lot of seniority because of the former 6-year terms. The new members that are here have the chance of being here for 12 years, and I think there's a great opportunity here in the state that you've got members who are going to be able to engage in public policy in such a way, become experts, subject matter experts, where we can actually accomplish some things for the long term.
And the new Democratic Speaker is also part of that new term limit regime, Mr. Rendon.
He is,
so
yeah.
presumably you two will be able to forge a relationship that will last beyond a year or two.
That's right.
It can last for several years.
That's right.
I know you received tremendous kudos for seconding his nomination to become Speaker. Talk to me about how you hope to build a relationship with Mr. Rendon. You know, you're around the same age, same generation. I have to hope that there will be some nice connections.
Yeah, for me, I'm one of those people that believe that even though you disagree with somebody, that you can still agree and be agreeable. There are things, between Anthony Rendon and I. Philosophically, we are worlds apart. He's center left. He's a self-described liberal. I'm a self-described conservative. But Anthony is a nice guy, and I look forward to working with him. And there are things that we can work together to be able to fix the big challenges of the day. We're going to do that.
So on what areas do you hope to collaborate? Because in the final analysis, the Republicans are in the minority, and barring an electoral shift will likely, I don't want to be predictive, but it looks like the state's pretty stable in terms of its electoral makeup. Yeah,
it's the things that we hope to be able to work on. If you look at where California's at today, and even with the budget that just recently the governor put out, we hope that we'll start investing in infrastructure here in California, and we also want to make sure that we pay down our unfunded liabilities. We still have, as a record budget, record revenues, expected revenues, and record expenditures, and yet
Can we talk about that, sir?
Sure.
Because I guess I'm a student of government, and I read the releases that came out from the Republican members in response to the Democratic governor's budget and the Democratic members. It seemed like the Republicans were a little happier with the Democratic governor's budget than the Democrats. Is this the best Republican governor the state has seen in a long time?
Well, look, I think I would say that I do believe that Jerry Brown understands math.
Right, okay.
And he understands accounting, and there's only so much money that's going to come in. He understands there's also from economics that are capital, because of capital gains, revenues come up and revenues go down. And here we are in the 5th, 6th year of a recovery where revenues have come up, and he knows that that's not going to be there for a long time. You don't want to keep spending money on ongoing expenses when we know that revenue is going to drop, and then we're going to end up having to cut things.
So let's talk about that, because you hinted at it. So we do have extra revenue. It's a fact. And the Democrats, at least some of them, would look toward building or refunding programs that exist.
Right.
I understand that the governor and some of the Republicans would look at one-time expenditures.
Yes.
It could be paying down the debt. It could be projects. What's your sense as the leader?
If you've got one-time revenue, it needs to be spent on one-time expenditures, and the things that we should be spending that money on are on infrastructure. Because those are one-time expenses. If you've got ongoing programs, then year by year, you've got to continue to keep funding that. That's not very fiscally wise.
So in your mind, what about either funding the rainy day fund to a greater extent with that one-time revenue, paying down the debt with a one-time revenue, or like you said, infrastructure? Or do you kind of combine them all?
Well, I think I think it's a little bit of all of it, but inside the rainy day fund, the governor did put an additional $2 billion into the rainy day fund. Of course, it could be a piggy bank that the Democratic majority in the legislature might want to raid. We're going to do whatever we can to make sure to try to stop that. But we've got to be able to put money in the rainy day fund because we know at some point in time that revenues are going to decline, and when they do, that's when you go and you take a look at what's in that piggy bank.
I want to talk about infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think we're still in a special session on transportation.
We are.
We are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of consternation about how best to repair our roads.
Yeah.
There's questions about the gas tax, which appears not to have increased since 1992. And so the question is, do we want to increase the gas tax? Do we want to look at how we fund trucks and the weight system,
fees.
weight fees? Or is it the one-time expenditures that you mentioned, sir?
Yeah, transportation is one of those things that is that has to be addressed. As I've become leader, I've been traveling all over this state, and I can tell you that all over the state, whether it's Northern California or Southern California, there's nothing worse than being stuck in traffic. You hear this term road rage. Well, you wonder why there is road rage. It's because we haven't built enough capacity. In addition, we haven't maintained the current roads that we have. There isn't any question that we've got to do something. The question is, where does the money come from?
So where does, because this does feel as if we can use some one-time monies for specific projects, but we probably do need a continuing revenue stream.
Yeah, that's right. So the Republicans put out a plan this last legislative session. It was a 9-point plan that would have come up with $6 billion in new revenue to be able to do the maintenance.
Through bonds or through?
No, through existing revenues, like the vehicle weight fees, the cap and trade, and a few other things. We have the ability within the current revenue that have come in to be able to solve this problem. One of the things when I was back in the district during our interim,
which is in Southern California, inland Southern California. I heard when we talked about, I asked these questions amongst my constituents, and what they said to me is, Chad, we're not paying $1 more in gas tax when we're still funding a $70 billion high-speed rail. And I didn't realize how significant that was. So let's talk about high-speed rail, because, look, the governor, in the final analysis, this is his baby. He's not budging on the high-speed rail project.
Right.
And so the question is it worth continuing the fight when it is so clear he wants this to go? Right.
So it might be the administration's priority, but it's not the people's priority. And the people are the ones that have to fund it.
But the
and
people
so we're talking
did vote to pass the
initially. But as you know, that the initial costs of what the people voted on are not what the plan is today. And so I think it's one of those things when you talk about priorities. I'm not saying that something like a high-speed rail isn't a decent idea, but when we've got failing roads, when people are stuck in traffic for hours a day, it's about priorities. Should we be using those transportation dollars to fund current transportation, to make sure we've got good capacity, or on some new idea?
So what's the compromise?
Well, I don't know. We're going to continue to keep having conversations. We've talked a little bit, even within the last few weeks. I think we're going to continue to have the conversation. We'll see what we can do.
His name is Chad Mayes. He is the new leader of the Republicans in the California State Assembly. If you want to watch other episodes of Local Edition, just sign on to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/charterlocaledition. My name is Brad Pomerance from Sacramento. This is Local Edition. Welcome, it's Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Sacramento today, and we are joined by Brian Maienschein. He is a member of the California State Assembly. Prior to joining the Assembly, you were the commissioner in San Diego County for homelessness. And we know we're facing a homeless crisis, but before we talk about the nitty-gritty, you dealt with the homeless every single day for, what, 4 years? Yeah. Who are they?
It's a diverse group. Mm-hmm. You have families. Families with kids.
Right. And that's what's heartbreaking.
Gut-wrenching.
I mean, it's one thing to see a homeless man on the street, painful, but when you see a mother with a child
kids.
And a dog, I mean...
Kids. It's rough. I mean, you think about, I know being a parent, I know you know being a parent because we've chatted about this. Right. It's hard to get homework done. It's hard to get all those things done. And we have a home to live in. Imagine trying to get through school or trying to just get through life when you're sleeping out on the sidewalks at night. It's rough.
And what's devastating, we look at the statistics for homelessness in California, and they break your heart. California has 12% of the United States population, but 21% of the homeless population. LA County has the largest homeless population in the nation. San Diego County, your home county, 4th largest in the nation. Yeah. It's up almost 3% in a year. What's going on?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I don't think there's any single thing we can point to and say this is the cause of it. Because frankly, if there were, you could fix it relatively easily. And that's not the case.
And what's surprising to me is that it seems countercyclical. I mean, I would have thought that the homeless crisis would be most dramatic, 5, 7, 8 years ago in the midst of the recession. But we're coming out of recession, and yet our numbers are spiking.
And I think there's different reasons for that. I think there's a segment of the homeless population that directly tracks with the economy.
Right.
In other words, these are people who might be waiters or waitresses or busboy, busgirl. They're kind of on the edge. They're working poor. And when the economy turns bad and they lose their job, they become homeless. But they have some level of job skills or something that they can do when the economy is good.
Right.
They do. That's a segment of the population. But you take, the mentally ill. I mean, you're mentally ill 100% of the time, regardless of what the economy is doing. And to me, the chronic homeless, those are the most difficult. I mean, that's who I spend a majority of my time with.
And that's the problem in California, especially LA County. LA County chronic homelessness has grown 55% in 2 years.
Right.
That's not a rounding error.
Exactly.
That is, there's something going on here, and we need to get a handle on it. So you are looking to take some small steps to get a handle on it. The state Senate is looking at a bond. I want to talk about that in a moment. But first, I want to talk about your efforts. And again, every little bit helps. We all know CEQA.
Yeah.
Know CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, and it focuses upon the construction of buildings and other things to be done in a way that will not adversely impact the environment. But it can be used as a weapon, one could argue. What's happening as it relates to CEQA and homeless construction projects for the homeless?
So I'm really pleased.
Yeah.
I had a bill that just recently got through the Natural Resources Committee that would waive CEQA if you're building transitional housing for the homeless or supportive housing for the homeless.
Okay.
I think that's an important step because it makes building that type of housing easier. It makes it cheaper. Those are good things.
So you got it through.
I got it through.
That's a miracle.
Yeah.
I mean, CEQA reform is very tough. Even though the Democratic governor wants CEQA reform, we didn't get CEQA reform for dams, for example.
Yeah.
I know some of your colleagues were looking to do that, but somehow you pushed it through. It's still pending. I mean, it went through committee, but you're feeling good that it's going to march forward.
I do. I think there's a commitment, and I credit my Democratic and Republican colleagues both, who saw the need for this, think it's important. And look, this is those numbers. All of us are seeing those numbers. You don't have to be in LA or San Diego to see those numbers. It's growing in Bakersfield and Fresno and everywhere else too.
But where it's growing, I've learned, sir, is it's growing in middle class and more affluent areas. And for better or for worse, that's when you start seeing action.
Yeah.
I mean, you have council members in San Diego, in Los Angeles, who represent affluent areas, and they're starting to make noise. it's too bad you have to wait for that to happen, but that's what we're seeing.
We are seeing that, and the good news on that is it is making people act. And so I think we are seeing a little, some movement on some of these issues like CEQA reform that I think are important.
But let's talk about what could be the most significant movement in literally decades coming out of the state of California. Your friends in the state Senate, Democrats and Republicans, went to Los Angeles recently, and they have proposed a $2 billion bond to rebuild or rehabilitate permanent housing for the mentally ill living on the streets. What do you make of that? I know it's early, and I'm not asking you for, an endorsement, but generally speaking, the fact that it's even being discussed, what do you make of that?
Well, it's early, and of course, as with anything, the devil's in the details. Having said that, I'm excited about it. I'm excited that there is this focus on this issue. I'm excited that there is a working group of people who care about this, and I think it's exciting that there's Democrats and Republicans on it. All of that's good.
What's interesting to me, and I'm just learning this, so help me out, as part of the announcement, there's been this focus on a concept known as housing first. And I guess under the housing first concept, the goal is to get these folks into a facility and not worry about substance abuse, addiction up front. Because so often it was, sure, you can come live in our temporary housing, but we're going to drug test you the minute you walk in, and we're going to drug test you every 3 days. And if you fail that test, you are out. Now there's a sea change on that question. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the idea behind it is that the problems associated with homelessness can't be dealt with when you're living on the street. That you need the housing first, and that's why it's called housing first. You need the housing first, get in the housing, and then these issues, substance abuse, mental health. And if you think about it, in terms of, let's talk about mental illness for a second. If you are mentally ill and you need to be on medication, if you're living on the streets, it is very unlikely that you will take your medication for a whole host of reasons. You'll lose it. It'll be stolen from you. There's a lot of reasons for that. Now you get in a house and all of a sudden it's different. You can put your medicine out on a counter. You can see it. You can take it. That's the idea behind it.
But how do you create a scenario where the pendulum isn't swinging so far the other way that people are using needles in these temporary shelters because we're focused on housing first?
Well, and I think you're right. I think typically, historically, the pendulum has swung from one direction to the other, and there is some happy medium ground in there that can be found. An example being is for that homeless person who's in housing, who starts addressing their let's say substance abuse, or mental health issues, they're not going to be in that housing long term if they don't fix that. This gives them the opportunity to fix that, to become clean, to become sober. That's the ultimate goal. It won't work in every case, let's be honest, but it will work in a lot of them.
One of the biggest issues we face when we look at homelessness is also housing. And we look at the cost of housing in California, in San Diego, in Los Angeles. It is 2.5 times greater than the national average. So the Senate proposal dances around affordable housing. Do we need to look more directly at affordable housing as well?
Oh, sure. And that's got to run the gamut. I mean, here's the other thing, is we can talk about bonds all we want, and those may or may not end up being good. But the reality is it's very expensive to build housing in California. Part of that's just market force. It's a desirable place to live. San Diego's, I'm biased.
Of course.
But it's a wonderful, desirable place to live. So it's always going to be expensive because people want to live there. It's going to drive the cost up. But also, to be fair, you have to look at what are all the fees that are going into this. What are all the taxes?
Well,
that are going
you
into
had
this?
CEQA reform, so that helps a bit, I would presume.
That'll help. That'll help a lot. But I mean, I think so that's what I mean by in terms of looking at homeless. You can't just look at it at one piece of it. It is a huge pie. You got to kind of attack it from a lot of different areas. But that's one of the things. If it's going to be that expensive to build housing, you're not going to build low-income housing.
Please come back, because I want to continue this conversation. It's one we're going to have throughout the entire year. We'll have to see what happens with the bond. It will wind up at the Assembly, presumably. His name is Brian Maienschein, member of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're in Sacramento on Local Edition.